I love this conference. In fact, I was thinking the other day that the very first conference I came to when I started this gig in agriculture was the old SACA conference, and I can't remember if it was in Medicine Hat or in Lethbridge, but in the building it was in, there was a wall with about 300 feet of tables covered in publications. So I think they had literally brought every publication the Ag Office had ever produced, brought it conveniently so you didn't have to go to the Ag Office to get it. And now I doubt anybody's hardly even picked up a brochure because everything's available online. So it's kind of neat when guys like Bob mentioned that we've known each other for 20 years, not just in terms of what's happened on the farm, but what's happened in terms of extension, how much it's changed. And certainly with the changes in Alberta agriculture, I know you guys are very fortunate, and as an organization, we're very fortunate to have Ken and his crew down here looking after Southern Alberta as well as they do with Farming Smarter. So I'm not Angela Brackenreed. I'm not as young. I may not be as pretty, and I'm definitely not as smart, but I am here. So Angela is one of the council agronomists, and there are a number of them across the province, across the prairies, and Angela is the harvest management and storage lead. So at any time, if you have any questions about what I'm discussing, I'll do my best to answer them, but please feel free to reach out to Angela and ask her about harvest management, about straight cutting. She's the lead on, she's very, very passionate about it. And she told me today this is the first time she's ever actually missed a presentation, which for those of us in extension is pretty remarkable considering the number of bad weather events we run across in a winter time. So the three things Angela was going to cover very, very well that I'll attempt to cover is why we need to measure and quantify harvest loss, a little bit about swath timing, and a little bit about straight cutting. So a couple years ago, the Canola Council, along with all of its partners being producers and industry, came up with a new goal, which was 52 bushels an acre. And a lot of people said, how are you going to get to 52? I think the surprising thing for a lot of people was the average at that time was 34 bushels an acre across the prairies. And just today, StatsCan came out with an Alberta estimate at 46 bushels an acre, which would be the highest average yield in Alberta ever. We've only cracked 40 bushels 3 times. But there's a number of small factors, or cracked 40, sorry, a few times. There's a few factors that'll help get to that 52 bushel and incremental. Certainly the genetics improvements that we've seen over the past decade that we'll see in the next 10 years are going to make up a big chunk. Doing a better job of seeding makes a difference. A little bit better feeding the crop's going to add 2 or 3 bushels. A better job of integrated pest management, including diversifying our rotations, is going to help. But then harvest management is the other one. And there is a lot of bushels that you grow that don't make it to the bin. And all you have to do is look at your volunteers. They didn't fall out of the sky and they didn't blow off the truck going by. Those are seeds coming out the back of the combine or being left when you're shaking the swath up, putting it through the combine. So we went out a few years ago under the research projects that growers help fund and started measuring the losses. And it wasn't uncommon to find losses of 8 to 10%. So if you're growing a 46 bushel crop and you're leaving 10% out there, that's just about 5 bushels. And if it's $10 a bushel, that's $50 an acre. And $50 an acre will buy you that extra pound of seed that you're trying to cut back on, or maybe it'll buy you a nice winter vacation, or it'll buy you some more fertility. But those numbers are real, and it really comes down to when we were measuring and going out into farmers' fields and combining up everything that's there and getting every seed, we'd get as high as 8, 10 bushels an acre, even on Angela's farm. And don't tell her I told this story, but we all tell it every chance we get. She farms with her dad, and one day her dad was out combining, and she looked and she thought, geez, Dad's going pretty fast. She went out and checked. He was over 12. So 12 bushels, it's worth the time to slow down, make some adjustments, and suddenly you're making more money. So you go through a lot of work all year. You don't want to leave it on the field at the end. So I am going to switch over because we made a little video. My favorite part's the narration of this video. But it kind of goes through what some of the growers are doing to help manage harvest losses.
So when looking at adjusting our combine for harvest losses, financially it's something that's really important for us to take the time. But once you start to get losses of 5 or even 10% on a 50 bushel canola crop, that's 5 bushels you could be losing. at $10 or $12, that's $50 or $60 an acre you could be losing. When you're looking at $500 an acre, that's quite a large percentage for just a few minutes or maybe a half an hour or an hour of time, starting and stopping the combine.
Measuring the actual loss of the combine, not just ensuring that everything is sealed properly and there aren't any leaks, but ensuring that the amount that we're throwing out over the combine is a half a bushel or a bushel or less. Because where 3% used to be an acceptable loss, today with the volumes you're pushing through, it really isn't, because those numbers can really add up.
I usually just watch the monitors and check on the ground from time to time. Seems good enough, but I don't really know exactly what I'm losing. It's more of a gut feel.
It's very hard to figure your loss with canola. I mean, you can't count berries.
The only way you can get a really good measurement is get your chopper out of the way and the spreaders out of the way so that it's dropping it straight down. Once you put the chopper and the spreader on, it's really a guesswork as to how much you're catching out there. You can, but it's less and less accurate. So this is sort of the best you can get, is if you can get them out of the way.
Just run along beside when the operator is comfortable at his operating speed, where he thinks the losses are acceptable, and throw it down.
And you go in with it upside down so that you're not catching as you stick it in. The idea then is to stop basically dead movement on the pan and flip it over so that the combine passes over. And that's what would land on the ground.
Physically separating the seed from the straw and chaff can be the most time-consuming part of the measurement process, so find a way that works best for you using one of these methods.
I don't have a fancy catch pan to measure my losses. What do most producers use?
Producers can likely find something that will work around the farm or at their local hardware store. It should not take significant investment. Ideally, what you use should have slightly raised sides to limit lost seed over the edges.
I have a 5-foot square catch pan that I use on a stick.
You put it with a magnet, stick to the bottom of your combine. Once you load up your combine, you just pull the plug and it'll drop down, and that's where you'll see where your losses are. And then we'll screen everything out and just see exactly how much we are throwing out.
Almost any type of sampling is better than not checking at all. Just remember that losses are not necessarily going to be uniform across the width of the discharge. The width of your pan depends on how you prefer to measure. For example, a smaller pan on a stick can be used to take measurements from precise locations. To get a feel for total losses with this method, multiple measurements across the discharge span would be necessary. A pan equal to the width of the discharge does not allow for precise interpretation of where the losses are occurring, but can reduce sampling error.
I've heard of people throwing 8 to 10 bushels out after they did some checks, and that's completely unacceptable. So,
like today, we proved that I think we optimized a combine here, saved ourselves 1 to 2 bushels of losses in a few minutes, where probably we wouldn't have noticed that if we weren't doing the procedure, right?
How do you producers figure out bushels per acre from the sample you collect?
There are several methods producers can use to determine what loss they are incurring based on the seed sample collected. For most accurate results, they can use a weight measurement or a volume measurement. For quick visual measurements, you can calculate the area of seed that is lying flat in a pan. The equation for measuring losses is quite involved, so we recommend downloading a smartphone application or using the guide available from PAMI and the Canola Council of Canada. If you use the guide, you first need to find your concentration factor, which is the width of your header divided by the width of discharge. The graphs provided for weight or volume can be used. These graphs are based on a 1 square foot collection area. For larger pans, just divide the volume or weight collected by the square footage of your pan. Let's say you collected 12.5 grams of canola in a 4 square foot pan. Divide 12.5 over 4. 3.1 is the number we are looking for under our concentration factor of 6. Slide over to the yellow column, and you can see in this scenario, the loss out the back of the combine is 50 pounds per acre, or 1 bushel. Alternatively, you can use one of the web-based tools or smartphone applications available and let it do the work for you by plugging in the required information and the amount of canola collected, either by weight or volume.
Yeah, so one of the things that we have that makes it a real big issue when you're combining throughout the day, your environmental conditions will change. And I think some of the most significant losses you can have is in the morning when it's tough, you tend to want to run your rotor a little bit faster, you want your fan a little bit faster, and then throughout the day, you can adjust those things, because I think you can really have a lot of losses if you think that you can set your combine at the beginning of the day and go for a couple of days without changing.
You're not going to save every berry, and I think that a bushel an acre is an acceptable loss.
It's a fine balance of trying to get the work done, get harvest completed, but also not lose a whole lot of money coming out the back end. So,
Well, when canola is worth $11 or $12 a bushel, a little bit adds up to a lot.
Invest a little time in checking your combine losses and reap a substantial return. For more information, visit the Canola Council online at www.canolacouncil.org. That pretty much covers it, doesn't it? Okay, so that covered it really quite well, and the one thing that Angela really wanted me to get across, and I promised her would, is you got to check. If you're not checking, you don't know. And a few years ago, we ran a couple of combine clinics in Alberta and across the prairies. And there's this one belief that, if I'm losing 5 or 7 bushels, I'm going to see it out there in the field. At one of the venues, which had a nice clean concrete floor, we measured the square footage of the floor, and before anyone showed up, we spread 10 bushels per acre of canola on the floor. No one even saw it. They were walking across it, never saw it. When we told them to look down, that there was 10 bushels an acre on the floor, they're like, but there's only one here and here. Well, yeah, because an acre's a pretty big thing, and a bushel of canola is not that big. So don't think digging around that you're going to see it. You're going to need to find a way to measure it, take the time to make some changes, and hopefully save yourself some money in the end. So there is that complicated sheet that was shown there with all the different ways to use a chart, but really what you want to do is you want to go to agrimetricapps.com. That's Tom Wolf's website. He's got a bunch of good little web-based apps that you download to your smartphone, including the harvest calculator. So they're not a true app. If you search the App Store, there might be an old version of this on that doesn't work. Get the web-based one, save it to your home screen, and then it's all cache data. So once you've downloaded the app, you can or the website, once you have the website saved, you can pull it up even without a data collection, and you punch in the numbers. What's the size of my pan? What's the size of my header? The size of my sieve? What did I collect? And then it does all the work without you finding conversion factors and other things. If you like that kind of stuff, by all means, grab your slide rule and have at it. So why are the losses high? And we're actually seeing in some cases the average loss seems to be higher as we move forward instead of getting better. And one of the big reasons is our combines are bigger, but they're not bigger all the way through. They got a lot more engine power. And you can push a lot more in and a lot more out, but that doesn't mean you're doing a good job of separating it. And canola is a crop that's pretty easy to thresh, but not so easy to separate. So your limitation isn't getting it out of the pods, it's trying to get it into the bin. And with better choppers, better spreaders, we're spreading that out even further, and it makes it that much harder to walk around and see any canola. Not that for the most part you're going to find canola seeds in the fall. You'll probably find them in the spring when they're volunteers. And the other thing is leakage. I mean, there's it's a very, very small seed and a very, very big machine with lots of little places where canola can be leaking out. So take a look through your machine, and if there's places it's leaking, then duct tape is everybody's best friend. We probably over-rely on what the monitor's telling us to a large extent, so that's part of doing the calculations, is once you've got a calculation, see what you measure, see what your monitor tells you, and now you've got a reference point. And one of the things Angela told me to caution you about is some guys will try slowing down and they'll actually see their monitor spike up, but don't forget there's a lag time as you slow down before the machine sort of resets itself where it's measuring the loss. So be patient, because speed is definitely one of the factors. And you know, we're putting wider headers on machines, putting more material through. The crops are getting heavier and bigger, and we're not making the speed adjustment to make up for bigger combines, bigger crops, more material going through. This is a chart PAMI put together. This is actually for all crops, but basically it shows the faster that you're going, the more likely you are to have losses. And there's probably a sweet spot in there somewhere around 3.5 miles an hour where your losses are minimal. So if you can plan your harvest or work your days or increase your capacity or diversify your rotation or whatever it is to let you combine at a little bit slower speed, you may find it pays for yourself. We had really, really nice low combining speeds during late November in central Alberta, but that wasn't because guys decided to slow down. But I know even riding around with my neighbors, I go up for a ride with them every year, and they measure all the time, and they know the differences between going 3 and 4 miles an hour, and they're substantial. But whenever I'm out with them, the neighbor across the road is out, and he's just giving her. He's, and I'm sure he's thinking, look at those guys in their fancy, expensive combines going so slow. But you know what? Next year, that guy's field is a carpet every year, and I don't know why he hasn't figured out that all those seeds that are growing in his field that he's spraying out now are ones that should have been in the bin. So in terms of calculating, that video went through really well. You just need something to catch it and measure it, and something to do the calculation. And there's a few measurements you need to know. It's really about taking the time, a half an hour, 45 minutes or whatever, to figure out a way to do that measurement. There used to be combine kits available. Pretty much anything you can put on a stick's going to help. And then the one you saw where it dropped, there's a few different guys selling electromagnetic pans that mount underneath your combine. They've either got a fob type release, or you pull the cigarette lighter that it's plugged into and the pan falls down. It's much better if you're doing it by yourself. If you're chasing a combine and reaching under, please wear all approved safety equipment that's Bill 6 approved. Certain videos we have to update, I think. And when you figure out, and most guys when they do this, their reaction isn't, wow, I'm hardly throwing anything over. More often than not, it's, holy crap, that's a lot of canola coming out the back. So make your changes, find out what it is, make a change, and then figure out what you're doing. Don't try changing a whole bunch of things at once, or you're not going to know what really the issue was. And probably the easiest and quickest thing to try adjusting is that speed thing. So in terms of getting more bushels in the combine, now it starts with swathing. So the swathing recommendation is 60% seed color change. So the longer you can wait in terms of swathing, the more the canola is going to finish and fill, and the more bushels in the bin. This graph shows the difference between a couple of seeding rates at 5 and 3 pounds. And really what this is to show is guys lower their seeding rates but maintain their yields. More and more of that yield is coming off of the side branches, and it's later to mature. So when you go through the swathing guide, it talks about measuring seed color change on the main stem. But if you have a plant with a pile of side branches, then you need to adjust that. And this is a graph Murray Hartman put together that, just so we have data, I guess, at least at one point in this presentation, that as you have more branches, the percentage of yield coming off the branches goes higher. If you only have one side branch, one main stem, then go with the main stem. But if you've got a plant with 6 side branches, you need to wait a little longer and let them mature. The longer you let them mature, the more bushels in the bin. There's more and more interest in straight cutting, and when it comes to straight cutting, it's not the be-all and end-all. Okay, straight cutting is a harvest management tool, which probably has its best fit for guys that have too many acres of canola to swath, that feel they have to start swathing too early. That may be less of an issue in southern Alberta with a longer harvest window, but some data put together at Indian Head. So in the dark green is stuff that was swath, and in the light green is stuff that was straight cut. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. There's no clear winner on either side, and that comparison was using optimal swath timing. If that comparison was done with swathing too early, then straight cutting would win more often than not. If you're interested in straight cutting, certainly talk to other growers that do it. They're probably a good source of information. Murray Hartman always says that you're probably going to have 1 lousy year out of 7 straight cutting. So if it happens in your 6th or 7th year, you're probably comfortable straight cutting. If you talk to a guy who's only straight cut once and didn't like it, he's probably a different source of information. But there's a number of factors you need to keep in mind, and you want a good field that's a good candidate for straight cutting. So you want a field that's got a good stand, is nice and knitted so it doesn't smash around too much in the wind. And in a lot of cases, topography is probably as important as anything, because you don't want a bunch of low green spots, because putting green material through the combine isn't a lot of fun. And just some pictures she sent along. So PAMI's doing some studies on straight cutting, and they've become experts at plugging combines. So you don't want to get into a situation, because if you've never straight cut canola, it's not like straight cutting cereals. When you're straight cutting, most of the stems are as green as the day you're swathing. So you're going to want to try and keep an eye on the architecture of the crop, cut as high as you can, minimize as much of those stems as you're putting through. Keep in mind, if you lower your seeding rate, you're probably getting larger stems. Those larger stems are probably less fun to drag out of a plug combine. I know she told me that when they got busy doing this one, they decided that if it wasn't research, that'd be their last adventure in straight cutting. But sometimes you tell a researcher to go out and go really early and just see what happens, and then you sit on the sidelines and chuckle. Once you're into straight cutting, timing becomes very, very critical, and what this graph shows is they went out in Indian Head on September 20th, which was at 10% seed moisture, kind of ideal time for straight cutting. And then they did some, measured the yield, then they waited a month and went back to see what the losses are. And you can see that on average, by waiting too long to straight cut, so if you leave too much standing and now you can't get to it because you don't have the harvest capacity, then you could be back to losing 10, 11% of your yield. Now you'll see in there are some varieties like the L140P, which has got some shatter tolerance into it, that then your losses are reduced. So there is some good technology to help you out with straight cutting, but there's probably a sweet spot in there between not doing any of it and selling the swather. So in terms of pre-harvest aids, they're not absolutely necessary, but they can be helpful. Reglone's probably the best one because it's a true desiccant, right? It's going to dry the crop down the quickest. Heats, both contact and systemic, can let you go in a little bit earlier to put it on. And doing it right, there are some benefits. The biggest benefit to Reglone is you can almost set your clock from the time you spray to the time you're going to be in doing your harvesting. Glyphosate, in case you need another reminder, it's not a desiccant. It's a weed control product that eventually kills the crop. So you will, if you're using glyphosate on InVigor canola, you will get some dry down. It does let you go in a little bit earlier, gives you some weed control, but it's a much bigger window of about 7 to 14 days when you can go in and combine. Just quickly on how important is header choice if you're going to be doing straight cutting. There is a project that's wrapping up. We hope to have the data available sometime in the spring, where they looked at a bunch of different types of headers, some different varieties at a few sites to try and figure out, is there the right header or the right system to try and make straight cutting better. And really, this kind of takes me back to when I used to talk about direct seeding. It's more about the man running it than the machine that he's using, and the slower you go, the better. Because I know how much you all loved hearing slow down at seeding, so now I get a chance to come up and tell you, so as long as you're going slow at seeding, you may as well go slow at harvest too. So just to wrap up, in summary, compared to optimal swath timing, straight cut yield is probably similar over the long term. You're not going to boost your yields way up by going to straight cutting, but there are some big gains to be made by going to optimal swath timing. And it's really a harvest management tool. So if you are thinking about it, it's probably a good thing to try on some acres for as much as anything else to let you delay that first day that you're out swathing canola, which might be too early. The first day to swath canola isn't the first day a neighbor's out, just in case you're wondering. And sort of the early results from that header research is that there's probably some headers that are easier to work with, more operator friendly, maybe a little bit more forgiving, but really they're not seeing significant differences in the early data that came in off the first 2 years. And a reminder that we're leaving a lot of bushels on the table by swathing too early. And I know I'm from up in central Alberta, and we kind of make some progress with getting swathing moving closer to 60, 70% seed color change. And then 1 year of bad weather, and the next year we're back to 40, 50% when guys are starting. And with a lot of canola acres in the rotation, there's a lot of acres that get cut awfully early, and it's costing guys 50, 60 bucks an acre. And the big thing is measure it. Find a way to measure it. Take the time to measure it more than once so you get a feel for it, what it is in different crops or what it is at different times of the day. Once you have a sense of what you're actually measuring out the back to what you're seeing on your monitor, then you can get some more comfort in there and hopefully put some more bushels in the bin. A couple of resources I want to mention. If you're not subscribed to the Canola Watch newsletter, do yourself a favor and sign up. The Canola Council agronomists from across the prairies call a whole bunch of retail contacts throughout the summer every week. They get an update on what is the issues going on across the prairies, what's coming up as an issue, and then you get free, unbiased, science-based information to help you make better decisions. It's a quick, easy email to read. The website itself is very searchable, so lots of good information. If you're interested in the research studies, if you go to canolaresearch.ca, all the research, which is of course all funded and backed by grower dollars, is all on a searchable database where you can drill down in different layers and compare different studies, because the dollars you put in goes into a lot of the research that we do. So it's very important to us that we can get those results back to you. And with that, I will wrap up Angela's presentation, and I'm not sure.
There's time.
There's time? That's unfortunate. Yep.
In southern Alberta, we've got wind.
You have wind down here?
Yeah. Have you ever seen a quarter swath and you couldn't find the swath?
Have I? I've had some in my yard and I don't farm. So the question was about wind and swathing. And that's kind of one of always the debates. And when the wind gets really bad, if it's swathed and it's not anchored, it's gone, right? But if you're planning on straight cutting and you've got a thin stand that's not nicely knit, I mean, a good thick matted stand, kind of, if you can shake a field at one end and watch it all the way, then that's pretty good. But a thin stand that gets smashing around isn't a whole lot better. So I don't have any good solutions for wind management other than keep that in mind when you're thinking about lowering seeding rates. There's some new information we just posted again on our website today about plant stands in canola, and we know that compared to older recommendations, we can maintain yield with less plants per square foot, which means in theory you can plant less plants per square foot. But before you go whole hog planting less plants, it's about how many plants you actually end up in the field, not how many seeds you put in. So if you're worried about frost and flea beetles, you don't want to lose plants to that. And at the end of the year, when you get back to those thin stands, those are the ones that you need to be more careful on swath timing. You may not have as much stubble to anchor them, and they're probably not as well suited to straight cutting. And I know all of this because I talked to Angela for an hour and I subscribed to Canola Watch, so that next year you too could give this presentation. Anyone else? I have a question. How many guys do straight cut here? Okay, keep your hand up for a second, look around. There's your experts in the room if you want to talk to them about straight cutting. Because really, it's one of those new things that while we're doing research, it's a lot like the direct seeding movement. It really started with farmers doing it, researchers kind of catching along, but a lot of our information comes down to what guys are doing in the field with those little adjustments. So as always, you can learn a lot from your neighbors and your friends and other people. So thank you.